Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you are to watch this video so you can understand what the discriminant is and to figure out what it tells you about a quadratic function. So what I need you to do is complete the two problems in section 1 and find out the solutions to those functions in that section. So pause the video and do that, and then turn the video back on when you're done. Okay, so you should have that finished, and here are your answers. So for the first one, you should have gotten the solutions of -1, 0 and -3, 0. And for the second one, you should have gotten -0.61, 0 and 0.76, 0. And so you should have realized that these functions both have two solutions. So each one had two solutions. Now I want you to pause the video again, and I want you to solve the two functions in section 2. Alright, so if you solve the two functions in section 2, you should have gotten a solution of -5, 0 for the problem on the left and 1, 0 for the problem on the right. And then you should have realized that both of those functions only had one solution. So our last section, section 3, go ahead and pause the video, solve those two problems, and then you can unpause it and check your answers. Okay, so here is the answer key for section 3. You will find that both problems in this section have no real solution. I went ahead and left my answers in this form right here with the I value. You don't need to go any further than that. And so the big idea with all three of these sections is we're trying to figure out what part of the quadratic formula determine how many solutions the function will have. And so what I hope you noticed is that what was underneath the square root, that b squared minus 4ac, that told you how many solutions we had. So when I was square rooting a positive number under the square root, I had two solutions, and those were the problems like section 1. And when I was square rooting a 0, I ended up having one solution because the square root of 0 is just 0. So that would have been like the problems in section 2. And then the problems in section 3 all had a negative number underneath the square root. And so those functions had no real solution. And so because the number of solutions that a function will have is determined by what's underneath the square root, we call it a really fancy name. So if you flip your paper over, you'll see that we call this the discriminant. And so the discriminant is just what is under the square root in the quadratic formula. And so that means that the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. So you'll want to jot that down, and then we'll talk about what the discriminant will tell us. So we kind of have already said it, but if the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, if that's greater than 0, which is a fancy way of saying it's positive, then we will have two solutions to a quadratic function, again, meaning that we would have two x-intercepts. And then if our discriminant is equal to 0, then we will just have one solution. And then if our discriminant is less than 0, which is just a fancy way of saying it's negative, there will be no real solution. So if we try to tie this back into the posters that we have hanging around the room, when the discriminant is positive, these functions will be like the graphs in the front of the room, so where we had two x-intercepts. These right here, these will be like the ones on the side of the room where the rest of the posters are, where we just had one x-intercept. And notice on those we were square rooting 0 on those, and that's what gave us just one x-intercept. And then if you look at the back of the room, when you were square rooting a negative value, that's when we had no real solution and we had no x-intercepts. So you have a few questions 1 through 6 that you can finish as practice, and then we'll talk about this some more in class tomorrow. Just make sure that particularly on number 3 through 6, well, I guess not 5, but 3, 4, and 6, you need to make sure